Amy Lynn Bradley. On March 24, 1998, 23-year-old Amy Lynn Bradley vanished from the Royal Caribbean cruise ship Rhapsody of the Seas while docked in Curaçao. Amy, a recent college graduate with a degree in sports psychology and experience as a lifeguard, had been on a family vacation with her parents and brother. The night before her disappearance, she had been seen socializing with members of the ship's band, particularly a bass player known as Alistair "Yellow" Douglas. Her father Ron last saw Amy asleep on their cabin balcony around 5:30 in the morning. When the family woke at 6, she was gone. Only her cigarettes and lighter remained, suggesting she had stepped away briefly and never returned. The discovery sent the family into immediate panic, and they alerted ship security. However, the response would later be criticized as inadequate and delayed. Initial theories suggested Amy might have fallen overboard, but her family quickly dismissed this. Amy was an accomplished swimmer and former lifeguard, making accidental drowning highly unlikely. More disturbing was Yellow's behavior that morning. He approached Ron Bradley before the family had even reported Amy missing, asking about her whereabouts. This struck Ron as deeply suspicious. "I knew what was going on," Ron later told investigators, believing Yellow knew more than he admitted. As hours turned to days, the investigation shifted focus to possible abduction. Then came the sightings that would haunt the family for decades. In 1998, just months after Amy disappeared, a woman matching her description was seen on a beach in Curaçao. The woman appeared distressed and approached a group of tourists, pleading for help, and mentioning her name was Amy Bradley. Before anyone could react, 3 men appeared and forcibly escorted her away. Could Amy have survived all these years, trapped in circumstances too horrifying to imagine? A year later, in 1999, a U.S. Navy officer reported seeing a woman matching Amy's description in a brothel in the Caribbean. The woman had whispered to him that her name was Amy Bradley and she was from Virginia. But before he could act, she was taken away. In 2005, another sighting occurred in a Barbados restroom where a woman claimed to be Amy from Virginia before disappearing. Perhaps most disturbing were photographs that surfaced in 2005, showing a woman identified as Jazz who bore a striking resemblance to Amy. The FBI analyzed the images using facial recognition technology, and while results suggested it could be her, nothing was ever confirmed. The photos appeared to show a woman engaged in activities, suggesting she was trapped in the world of exploitation. The Bradley family has never stopped searching. They've offered rewards, climbing as high as $250,000 for information leading to Amy's return. The FBI joined the investigation, posting Amy on their kidnapping page with a $25,000 reward. However, the family has also fallen victim to cruel scams, including one in 1999 that cost them $210,000 when fraudsters promised information about Amy's location. Despite being legally declared dead in 2010, the case remains active. In 2025, a Netflix documentary titled "Amy Bradley is Missing" generated 3 significant new leads. First, suspicious internet activity on a website dedicated to finding Amy showed IP addresses traced to a boat near Barbados. Second, investigators received information suggesting Amy may have been forced into exploitation and could have had children as a result. Third, a former cruise ship server came forward claiming to have witnessed a señorita kidnapped the morning Amy disappeared. The case highlights the vulnerability of passengers on cruise ships and the challenges of investigating disappearances in international waters. The delayed response, jurisdictional complications, and difficulty preserving evidence all contributed to the investigation's struggles. Yellow and other band members were interviewed multiple times, but never charged. And the cruise line faced criticism for how they handled the initial hours of Amy's disappearance. For Ron and Iva Bradley, every sighting brings both hope and anguish. The possibility that their daughter might still be alive, trapped in unimaginable circumstances, keeps them searching even as decades pass. Amy's brother Brad has also remained active in the search, maintaining websites and social media accounts dedicated to finding his sister. From the open ocean to a quiet Midwestern morning, our next case shows how danger can strike in the most unexpected places. Jody Huisentruit. June 27, 1995. Should have been just another early morning for 27-year-old Jody Huisentruit, an anchor for Kim TV in Mason City, Iowa. Jody was known for her bright personality, dedication to her career, and connection with viewers. That morning, she had the early shift and needed to be at the station by 4 in the morning to prepare for the morning newscast. When Jody didn't show up for work, her producer grew concerned. She had called him at 4:10 in the morning to say she had overslept and was running late, but she never arrived at the station. When colleagues couldn't reach her, they asked police to check on her. What officers found at her apartment complex parking lot told a chilling story. Jody's red Mazda Miata sat in the parking lot with the key bent in the door lock, as if someone had struggled while trying to unlock it. Her belongings were scattered on the ground near the car, including her red high heels and a blow dryer. A palm print was found on the vehicle, and drag marks suggested a violent confrontation. Neighbors reported hearing screaming around 4:30 that morning and seeing a white Ford Econoline van in the area. But no one had called police at the time. The scene indicated Jody had been ambushed as she headed to her car. She had clearly fought back, but whoever took her had overpowered her and removed her from the parking lot. Despite an exhaustive investigation involving over 1,000 interviews, Jody's body has never been found. She was declared legally dead in 2001, but her family and investigators have never given up hope of finding answers. Several persons of interest emerged over the years. John Van Cees, a neighbor and friend who was the last person known to have seen Jody the night before her disappearance, faced intense scrutiny. He had invited Jody to his apartment to watch a video the evening before she vanished. Van Cees maintained his innocence until his death in 2024, and no evidence ever definitively linked him to the crime. Another person of interest was Tony Jackson, a serial offender with a history of targeting women. However, like Van Cees, no concrete evidence tied him to Jody's disappearance. The investigation took a dramatic turn when investigators began looking at Christopher Rivac, a suspected serial killer with connections to Mason City. What pattern might connect this case to others across the Midwest? Rivac had lived in Mason City around the time of Jody's disappearance and was later connected to other cases, including the deaths of Deidre Harm in 2006 and Renee Williams in 2007. His modus operandi typically involved abducting women from bars, though Jody's case differed in that she was taken from her apartment complex. Rivac took his own life in 2009 before he could be questioned about Jody's case, taking whatever knowledge he had to his grave. In 2008, someone anonymously mailed Jody's personal journal to the television station where she had worked. The journal provided insights into her life and thoughts, but offered no clear clues about who might have wanted to harm her. The gesture seemed designed to taunt investigators or keep public interest alive. A 2024 search in Winsted, Minnesota, based on a tip, yielded no evidence. The case remains active, with a website, findjody.com, maintaining information and accepting tips. The reward for information has fluctuated between $25,000 and $50,000 over the years. Jody's case highlights the dangers faced by women in media, particularly those with predictable schedules and public visibility. Her routine was well known to viewers and anyone following her career. The early morning hours when she typically left for work provided cover of darkness for her abductor. In a video recorded before her disappearance, Jody said, "I love my job," reflecting the passion that had driven her to pursue journalism. In 2025, the Hulu documentary series Her Last Broadcast explored the case in detail, examining all the persons of interest and theories that had emerged over 3 decades. While the documentary generated renewed interest, it provided no definitive answers about what happened to Jody that morning. The investigation continues, with Mason City Police and the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation keeping the case active. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, Jody's family and supporters gather to remember her and renew their plea for anyone with information to come forward. While one woman vanished in seconds, our next case reveals a predator who spent years perfecting his ability to make people disappear without a trace. Bear Brook Murders. In November 1985, a hunter discovered a metal barrel in Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Inside were the remains of a woman and what appeared to be a young person. The bodies had been there for years, decomposed beyond visual identification. With limited forensic technology available in the 1980s, investigators could do little more than document the victims as Jane does and hope for future breakthroughs. 15 years later, in May 2000, another barrel was found just 300 feet from the first location. This barrel contained the remains of 2 more individuals. All 4 victims had been placed in the barrels between 1977 and 1981 and had been subjected to blunt force trauma. The discovery of the second barrel confirmed investigators' worst fears. They were dealing with a serial perpetrator who had dumped multiple victims in the same area. Early DNA testing revealed complex familial relationships among the victims. The woman in the first barrel was the biological mother of one individual found with her. However, another individual in the second barrel was a half-sibling, sharing the same father but having a different mother. Most puzzling was a fourth person who had no biological connection to any of the others. This suggested the perpetrator had targeted multiple families or had relationships with several different women. The case went cold for years, despite investigators' best efforts. They had no identities for the victims and no leads on who might have put them there. The breakthrough would eventually come from an unexpected connection to a completely different case thousands of miles away. In 2002, a woman named Yoon Soon Jung disappeared from her home in Richmond, California. Her boyfriend, who she knew as Larry Vanner, became a person of interest. When police tracked him down in 2003, they discovered his real name was Curtis Kimball, and he was wanted for abandoning a young person at an RV park in California years earlier. That young person would later be identified through genetic genealogy as Don Bowden. Could one man have been living under multiple identities while leaving a trail of victims across the country? In 2017, the pieces finally started coming together. DNA from the Bear Brook barrels was compared to samples from the California cases. The match revealed that Curtis Kimball, Larry Vanner, and several other aliases were all the same person. Terry Peter Rasmussen, born in 1943 in Denver, Colorado. Rasmussen had served in the Navy and had a history of moving from place to place, assuming new identities, marrying women, and then disappearing when things became complicated. Through painstaking genetic genealogy work, investigators began identifying his victims. The woman in the first barrel was Marlies Honeychurch, who had been in a relationship with Rasmussen. With her were her offspring Marie Vaughn and Sarah McWaters. But the fourth person remained a mystery for years longer. Finally, in September 2025, advanced genetic genealogy identified the middle person as Ria Rasmussen, Terry Rasmussen's own daughter. The identification came through DNA Doe Project's analysis of a family tree spanning 25,000 people. The revelation raised haunting questions about Ria's mother, a woman named Pepper Reed, who was believed to have been in a relationship with Rasmussen. Reed has never been found and is presumed to have met the same fate as his other victims. Rasmussen had a pattern of targeting vulnerable women, often those with young dependents, inserting himself into their lives, and then disposing of them when they were no longer useful to him. Investigator Chris Elphick noted something particularly chilling about Rasmussen's crimes. He's one of the only serial offenders that killed victims he knew. Most serial killers target strangers, but Rasmussen murdered people he had relationships with, including his own daughter. Rasmussen himself would never face justice for the Bear Brook incidents. He had passed away in 2010 while serving time in California for taking Yoon Jun's life. His death came before investigators had connected him to the New Hampshire barrels. His motive remains partially unclear, though psychological analysis suggested he was manipulative and viewed people as disposable once they complicated his life or threatened to expose his lies. From a killer who destroyed entire families, we turn to a case where one person's disappearance left a family desperately searching for answers. Kyron Horman. June 4, 2010, started like any other day at Skyline Elementary School in Portland, Oregon. The school was hosting a science fair, and students had arrived early with their parents to set up displays. 7-year-old Kyron Horman was excited to show off his project about tree frogs, complete with poster board and carefully researched information. His stepmother, Terry Horman, had dropped him off that morning and even took a photograph of Kyron standing proudly in front of his display. That image would become the last confirmed sighting of Kyron. According to Terry, she left the school around 8:45 in the morning, expecting Kyron would head to his classroom when the science fair concluded. But Kyron never made it to class. When Kyron didn't come home on the school bus that afternoon, his parents assumed there had been a miscommunication. But calls to the school revealed the truth. Kyron had been marked absent from all his classes that day. He had simply vanished sometime between the science fair and when classes were supposed to begin. The disappearance triggered one of the largest search efforts in Oregon history. The operation cost approximately $1.4 million and involved over 4,000 tips. Search teams combed through nearby woods, checked bodies of water, and interviewed everyone who had been at the school that morning. Despite this massive effort, no trace of Kyron was found. Attention quickly focused on Terry Horman. As the last person known to have seen Kyron, she faced intense scrutiny. Investigators examined her timeline that morning, which included running errands after leaving the school and going to the gym. But inconsistencies emerged. Terry failed multiple polygraph tests, and her behavior raised red flags for investigators. Where had Kyron gone in the brief window between the science fair and the start of classes? The case took a darker turn when investigators uncovered allegations that Terry had tried to hire someone to harm her husband, Kane Horman, Kyron's father. These allegations, combined with the failed polygraph tests, made Terry the primary focus of the investigation. However, no charges were ever filed, and Terry has maintained her innocence. Kane filed for divorce from Terry shortly after Kyron's disappearance and sought to restrict her access to their daughter. In 2012, he filed a civil lawsuit against Terry, but the case was eventually dropped. The family dynamics became a central focus of media coverage, with speculation about what might have happened in the Horman household leading up to Kyron's disappearance. Kyron's biological mother, Desiree Young, became a fierce advocate for finding her son. She has spoken publicly about the anguish of not knowing what happened to Kyron, telling reporters, "Life keeps going on, and I don't want it to." Her statement captured the impossible position of parents whose loved ones vanish without a trace, forced to continue living while trapped in limbo. Over the years, various theories have emerged. Some believe Kyron wandered away from the school and became lost in the surrounding woods. Others suspect he was taken by someone who had been at the science fair that morning. The theory that has gained the most traction among investigators is that someone with knowledge of the school and Kyron's routine planned his disappearance. In 2025, renewed hope emerged when investigators began digitizing files for FBI review. The digitization process aims to make it easier for federal investigators to review the massive amount of evidence collected over 15 years. New technologies and fresh perspectives might reveal connections that earlier investigators missed. The case has highlighted vulnerabilities in school security and the challenges of maintaining accountability for students during chaotic events like science fairs. Skyline Elementary implemented new security measures after Kyron's disappearance, including stricter sign-in procedures and better communication between teachers about student whereabouts. Kyron's case remains open and active. Portland police and the FBI continue to pursue leads, and the family maintains hope that someday they will learn what happened. Every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, vigils are held and renewed appeals for information are made. From one person who vanished from a school, we turn to a case where two young people thought they were safe on a familiar trail. Delphi murders, February 13, 2017, was a day off school, and Abigail Williams and Liberty German decided to spend it hiking on the Monon High Bridge Trail in Delphi, Indiana. The girls, best friends who were inseparable, were dropped off at the trail around 1 in the afternoon with plans to be picked up later. It should have been an ordinary day, enjoying nature on a familiar path. When the person who was supposed to pick them up arrived at the designated time, the girls were nowhere to be found. Calls to their phones went unanswered. As darkness fell and the girls still hadn't appeared, their families contacted police. Search efforts began immediately, with volunteers and law enforcement combing the trails and surrounding areas. The next day, February 14th, the bodies of both girls were discovered near Deer Creek, about half a mile from the bridge. The scene suggested they had been subjected to terrible harm. But investigators had a crucial piece of evidence that would become central to the case: Liberty German's phone. Liberty, known as Libby, had been recording on her phone at some point before the attack. The phone captured an image of a man on the bridge behind them and audio of a male voice saying, "Down the hill." The grainy image showed a man in jeans and a blue jacket, while the audio clip, though brief, captured a commanding tone. Investigators released both the image and audio to the public, hoping someone would recognize the person. Who was the man on the bridge, and why had no one come forward to identify him? The case generated massive public interest. The image and audio were shared millions of times on social media. Tips poured in by the thousands, but for years, no arrest was made. Investigators worked through leads, cleared suspects, and continued analyzing evidence. The case seemed destined to remain unsolved, despite having an image and voice recording of the suspected perpetrator. Then in October 2022, Richard Allen was arrested. Allen was a local man who worked at a CVS pharmacy in Delphi and lived in the community. His arrest shocked residents who knew him as a quiet, unremarkable neighbor. The breakthrough came when investigators reviewed an old tip that had been misfiled. Alan had actually come forward early in the investigation to report that he had been on the trail that day. But somehow, his information had been lost in the thousands of tips received. When investigators finally followed up on Alan's original statement, inconsistencies emerged. Forensic analysis revealed a bullet found at the scene matched Alan's gun. Further investigation uncovered that Alan had been wearing clothing matching the description of the man in Libby's video. During his time in custody awaiting trial, Alan made over 60 confessions, including detailed admissions to his wife and mother. In one particularly chilling confession to his wife, he admitted his responsibility. His wife later told reporters, "My husband's a monster," struggling to reconcile the man she had known with the person capable of such acts. In November 2024, Alan was convicted and sentenced to 130 years in prison. However, the case didn't end there. Alan's defense team filed an appeal, and in 2025, the court approved an extension of the appeals process, citing disputes over evidence and trial procedures. The appeal argues various issues with how the case was handled, though Alan remains incarcerated while the legal process continues. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. From a case solved by technology, we move to a mystery where technology itself became part of the puzzle. Ben McDaniel. On August 18, 2010, 30-year-old Ben McDaniel arrived at Vortex Spring, a popular diving location in Pasco County, Florida. Ben was an experienced diver who had been visiting the site regularly, often diving alone despite warnings about the dangers of solo diving. That day, staff at Vortex Spring saw him prepare for a dive, but he never resurfaced. His truck remained in the parking lot, and his diving equipment was missing. Ben had been going through a difficult period in his life. He had recently experienced personal setbacks and was working through emotional challenges. Some who knew him wondered if his frequent diving trips were a way to find peace or escape from his troubles. The underwater cave system at Vortex Spring is complex and dangerous, with sections requiring special certification to access. When Ben didn't return, staff at Vortex Spring initiated search procedures. What they found was puzzling. Ben's truck was still parked at the site, and his personal belongings were in the vehicle. Initial searches of the accessible parts of the cave system found no sign of him. As the search expanded, involving some of the world's most experienced cave divers, the mystery deepened. The cave system at Vortex Spring has a main cavern accessible to recreational divers. But beyond that lies a restricted area requiring advanced cave diving certification. A locked gate separates these sections, meant to prevent uncertified divers from venturing into the dangerous passages beyond. Ben had received basic cave diving training, but was not certified for the most hazardous areas. Search teams discovered something odd. Ben's diving tanks were found positioned in unusual places within the cave, as if they had been staged rather than abandoned naturally. This discovery raised questions about whether someone had moved them after Ben's dive. Some searchers wondered if the scene had been manipulated to suggest Ben had gone deeper into the cave than he actually had. Could Ben still be somewhere in the unexplored depths? Or did something else happen? Ed Sorensen, one of the world's most experienced cave recovery divers, conducted an exhaustive search of the cave system. After days of searching every accessible passage, Sorensen made a definitive statement. He's not in there. This conclusion stunned investigators and Ben's family. If Ben wasn't in the cave, where was he? several theories emerged. The most straightforward explanation was that Ben had experienced a medical emergency or equipment failure while diving, and his body had somehow been carried into an unexplored section of the cave system. The spring has underground passages that have never been fully mapped, and it's possible Ben's remains are in an area that has never been accessed. A darker theory suggested foul play. The unusual positioning of Ben's equipment raised suspicions that someone might have staged the scene. Some speculated that Ben could have been involved in something that led to his disappearance, though no evidence supported this theory. Others wondered if Ben had staged his own disappearance, though his family firmly rejected this possibility. The owner of Vortex Spring faced scrutiny during the investigation. Questions arose about liability and whether proper safety protocols had been followed. The locked gates separating the restricted area had been found unlocked on previous occasions, raising concerns about whether Ben might have accessed areas he wasn't supposed to enter. Ben's family believed he must be trapped somewhere in an unexplored section of the cave. They struggled with the uncertainty of not having his body or any definitive answers about what happened. The case highlighted the dangers of cave diving and the challenges of recovering remains from complex underwater systems. Years after Ben's disappearance, the case remains unsolved. No body has ever been recovered, and no new evidence has emerged to explain what happened that August day. The mystery of Ben McDaniel continues to captivate diving enthusiasts and true crime followers, representing one of the most baffling disappearances in diving history. While one man disappeared into the depths, our next case involves a predator who struck repeatedly on city streets. Claremont serial killings. In the affluent Perth suburb of Claremont, Western Australia, the mid-1990s should have been a time of prosperity and safety. Instead, the community was gripped by fear as young women began disappearing from the entertainment district. The cases would become known as the Claremont serial killings, one of Australia's most notorious unsolved mysteries for over 2 decades. The first confirmed victim was Sarah Spears, who vanished in January 1996 after a night out with friends. Sarah had called a taxi from a phone booth, but when the taxi arrived, she was gone. Her body has never been found, leaving her family without closure. Jane Rimmer disappeared in June 1996. Like Sarah, Jane had been out with friends in Claremont's entertainment precinct. She was last seen standing on Sterling Highway, apparently waiting for a ride. Her body was discovered weeks later in bushland, showing she had been subjected to terrible harm. The third victim, Sierra Glennon, vanished in March 1997 after leaving a hotel in Claremont. Her body was found weeks later in a different area of bushland. The cases shared disturbing similarities. All 3 women had been out in the same entertainment area, all disappeared in the early morning hours, and those whose bodies were found showed evidence of similar harm. The investigation became one of the largest in Australian history. Police conducted massive operations, including setting up a task force specifically dedicated to the Claremont cases. They investigated hundreds of suspects, conducted thousands of interviews, and pursued countless leads. Despite these efforts, the killer remained unidentified for over 20 years. Who was stalking the streets of Claremont, and how had he evaded detection for so long? The breakthrough finally came through advances in DNA technology. In December 2016, Bradley Robert Edwards was arrested and charged with the killings. Edwards had been living an ordinary life in Perth, working as a telecommunications technician. He was married and appeared to be a regular member of the community, making his arrest all the more shocking. Edwards had actually been on police radar before. In the 1980s and 90s, he had been convicted of lesser offenses, but investigators hadn't connected him to the Claremont cases until DNA evidence linked him to Sierra Glennon. Further investigation revealed he could also be connected to Jane Rimmer's case. The trial, which concluded in 2020, revealed disturbing details about Edwards' pattern of behavior. He was convicted of taking the lives of Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon, though he was acquitted in Sarah Spears' case due to insufficient evidence. However, investigators believe he was responsible for her disappearance as well. Edwards was also convicted of other offenses committed in the 1990s. The evidence showed he had been targeting women in the area for years, with his attacks escalating in severity. His modus operandi involved approaching women who appeared to be alone, offering them rides, and then taking them to remote locations. During the trial, it emerged that Edwards had worked for Telstra, the telecommunications company, which gave him detailed knowledge of Perth's geography and remote areas. This knowledge proved crucial in understanding how he had been able to dispose of bodies in locations that weren't easily discovered. The psychological profile that emerged during the trial painted a picture of a predator who carefully selected victims and planned his attacks. His ability to maintain a normal appearance while committing such acts demonstrated the challenges of identifying perpetrators who don't fit obvious profiles. Don Spears, Sarah's father, spoke about the verdict, expressing both relief at finally having answers and frustration that Edwards had been acquitted in Sarah's case. The family has never been able to lay Sarah to rest, as her body has never been found. Edwards received life sentences for both convictions, with the judge noting the calculated nature of his offenses and the devastating impact on the families and community. From a predator finally caught, we turn to victims who remained nameless for decades. Sumter County does. On August 9, 1976, 2 bodies were discovered in Woodland near Sumter County, South Carolina. A person walking in the area stumbled upon the remains and immediately contacted authorities. The bodies, a man and a woman, had been there for several days and showed evidence of having been harmed. Both had been shot, and their bodies had been left in the remote location. What made this case particularly challenging was the complete absence of identification. Neither victim had identification documents, and their belongings offered no clues to their identities. They became known simply as the Sumter County Does, anonymous victims whose names were lost to time. Investigators worked to determine who these people were and what had brought them to South Carolina. The evidence suggested they might have been traveling, possibly hitchhiking, when they encountered someone who harmed them. Their clothing and belongings suggested they were young and possibly transient, moving from place to place without permanent addresses. For decades, the case remained one of the most frustrating mysteries in South Carolina. Investigators had bodies, evidence of how they had been harmed, and even some clues about their final hours. But without identities, they couldn't begin to understand who might have wanted to harm them or why. The Jane and John Doe designations meant the victims couldn't even have proper funerals with their real names. Over the years, various theories emerged about who the victims might be. Some investigators believed they could be runaways from the Northeast. Others thought they might have been hitchhiking across the country, perhaps heading to Florida or another warm-weather destination. The 1970s were a time when hitchhiking was more common, and many young people traveled this way. How long would these 2 souls remain nameless? The breakthrough came in 2021, 45 years after the bodies were discovered. Genetic genealogy finally provided the answers investigators had sought for decades. The female victim was identified as Pamela Buckley from Colorado, and the male victim was James Freund, also from Colorado. They had been traveling together, hitchhiking across the country, when their journey ended in tragedy. Pamela had been reported missing by her family in Colorado, But in an era before computerized databases and easy information sharing between states, the connection was never made to the unidentified bodies in South Carolina. Her family had spent decades wondering what happened to her, never knowing she had been found, but not identified. The identification brought both relief and renewed grief to the families. After 45 years, they finally knew what had happened to their loved ones. But the knowledge came with the painful reality that Pamela and James had been harmed and left in the woods. The families were able to finally have proper memorials and lay their loved ones to rest with their real names. However, identifying the victims didn't solve the entire mystery. Investigators still don't know who was responsible for taking their lives. The case remains open, with authorities hoping the identification might generate new leads. Someone who was in the area in 1976 might remember seeing the couple or might have information about what happened to them. Several suspects were investigated over the years, including known offenders who operated in the area during that time period. Some investigators believe the perpetrator might have been someone who regularly picked up hitchhikers, perhaps offering rides but having darker intentions. The remote location where the bodies were found suggests someone familiar with the area. The motive remains unclear. The positioning of the bodies and evidence at the scene suggested robbery could have been a factor, though investigators couldn't rule out other possibilities. The randomness of hitchhiking meant that Pamela and James might have been unfortunate victims of a predator who targeted vulnerable travelers. From victims finally identified, we turn to one of history's most infamous unsolved cases, Elizabeth Short. January 15, 1947. A woman walking in Los Angeles' Leimert Park neighborhood made a horrifying discovery. What she initially thought was a discarded mannequin turned out to be the body of a young woman, severed in half at the waist. The body showed signs of having been subjected to extreme harm, and the careful positioning suggested the perpetrator had spent considerable time with the victim after her demise. The victim was soon identified as Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old woman who had been living in Los Angeles and dreaming of becoming an actress. Elizabeth had last been seen alive on January 9th, and her body had been meticulously cleaned before being left in the vacant lot. The condition of the body suggested someone with possible medical knowledge, or at least an understanding of human anatomy. The case immediately captured media attention, and reporters gave Elizabeth a nickname that would become infamous: the Black Dahlia. The name came from her dark hair and clothing, as well as a popular movie from that era called The Blue Dahlia. The media frenzy that followed would both help and hinder the investigation. Detectives faced an overwhelming investigation. Hundreds of people came forward to confess to the case, seeking attention or fame. Each false confession required investigation time, pulling resources away from legitimate leads. The media's constant coverage created a circus atmosphere that made serious investigation difficult. Elizabeth's background revealed a young woman who had come to Los Angeles chasing dreams like thousands of others. She had moved around frequently, staying with various acquaintances and trying to break into the entertainment industry. Her transient lifestyle made it difficult for investigators to track her final days and determine who she had been with before her disappearance. Who had the knowledge and opportunity to commit such a calculated act? The investigation pursued numerous theories. Some focused on individuals with medical or surgical backgrounds, noting the precision of how the body had been divided. Others looked at known offenders in the Los Angeles area who had histories of targeting women. The investigation files eventually grew to include thousands of pages of interviews, tips, and theories. One challenge was the sheer number of potential suspects. Los Angeles in the 1940s was a city of millions, with countless people passing through seeking opportunity in the entertainment industry. Elizabeth had interacted with many people during her time in California, any of whom could have been involved in her demise. Over the decades, various suspects have been proposed. Some were based on deathbed confessions, others on circumstantial evidence, and still others on theories developed by amateur investigators. None have been definitively proven, and the case remains officially unsolved. The Los Angeles Police Department has never closed the case, though active investigation has waned over the years. The condition of Elizabeth's body and the manner in which it was displayed suggested a perpetrator with severe psychological issues. The cleaning of the body and careful positioning indicated someone who wanted the body to be found in a specific state. These details led criminal profilers to believe the perpetrator might have had personal knowledge of Elizabeth or might have been acting out a specific fantasy. The FBI assisted in the investigation, using their resources to track down leads across the country. However, the limitations of forensic science in 1947 meant that crucial evidence might have been missed or improperly preserved. No usable DNA evidence exists from the case, as such technology didn't exist at the time and biological evidence wasn't preserved in ways that would be useful for modern testing. The Black Dahlia case has become one of the most famous unsolved cases in American history, spawning books, movies, and endless speculation. Elizabeth's short story represents both the dark side of Hollywood dreams and the limitations of criminal investigation in an era before modern forensic techniques. Her case remains open, with the slim hope that someday new evidence or techniques might finally reveal who was responsible. From one tragedy that captivated a nation, we turn to a case that has haunted a family for 8 decades. Sodder children. Christmas Eve, 1945, should have been a night of joy for the Sodder family in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George and Jenny Sodder had 10 offspring, and the house was full of excitement for Christmas morning. But around 1 a.m. on Christmas Day, fire broke out in the Sodder home. George and Jenny managed to escape with 4 of their little ones, but 5 others were believed to be trapped upstairs. George attempted to rescue them, but couldn't reach the upper floor. He tried to use his trucks to position them under windows, but mysteriously, neither vehicle would start despite having worked fine earlier. The ladder they usually kept near the house was missing. As the fire consumed the home, the family could only watch in horror. When the fire died down and authorities examined the scene, they made a puzzling discovery. No remains were found. The 5 young ones who had been upstairs had seemingly vanished without a trace. Fire officials initially suggested the intense heat had completely cremated the bodies, but this explanation raised questions. Could a house fire really cremate bodies so thoroughly that no trace remained? The Sodder family never accepted that their little ones had perished in the fire. Too many strange elements surrounded the incident. Before the fire, a stranger had appeared at their house, making odd comments about the family and their home. The night of the fire, witnesses reported seeing strange lights and unfamiliar cars in the area. A woman claimed to have seen the youngsters in a passing car after the fire occurred. George Sodder began investigating the fire himself, unconvinced by the official explanation. He discovered that the fire chief had actually been at the scene very quickly, suggesting he might have been in the area already. The chief later changed his story about what he had observed at the fire. Phone lines to the Sodder home had been cut before the fire started, preventing them from calling for help immediately. Had someone deliberately targeted the Sodder family that Christmas Eve? The family pursued every lead and spent their life savings on the investigation. They put up a billboard along Route 61, displaying photographs of the missing youngsters and offering a reward for information. The billboard remained for decades, becoming a landmark in the area. Various theories emerged about what might have happened. Some believed the youngsters had been taken as part of a revenge plot against George Soter. He was an Italian immigrant who had been outspoken against the Italian dictator Mussolini, potentially making him a target. Others suggested organized criminal involvement or a kidnapping scheme gone wrong. In the 1960s, the family received a photograph in the mail showing a young man who resembled one of the missing boys. The photo came with a cryptic message, but no return address. Despite efforts to trace the photo's origin, investigators found no conclusive connections. Experts who later examined the evidence noted several suspicious elements. The fire burned unusually hot and fast for a house fire. The missing ladder and the trucks that wouldn't start suggested preparation by someone who didn't want the family to fight the fire effectively. Cut phone lines indicated premeditation. All these elements pointed toward arson rather than accident. However, the passage of time has made definitive answers impossible. Most of the primary witnesses and family members have passed away. Any evidence that might have existed has long since disappeared. Modern investigators who have reviewed the case files note that while the circumstances were indeed suspicious, the most likely explanation is that the youngsters did perish in the fire, and the suspicious elements were either coincidental or exaggerated over time. George and Jenny Soter died believing their little ones had been taken and were alive somewhere. Jenny spent her final years convinced she would be reunited with them. The family never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, and never accepted the official explanation. The Soter case continues to fascinate researchers and true crime enthusiasts, representing the painful limbo families experience when loved ones disappear without definitive answers. Whether the youngsters perished in the fire or were taken, that Christmas Eve remains a mystery that likely will never be solved. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.